Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kathy. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Before we start, I just wanted to cover a few items. We will have participation certificates available. So if you would like a certificate, I'll put my email in the chat box. Just please send me an email to request your certificate, and you'll get it within a few days after this webinar. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature instead of the chat box to ask your question. This will just help us see your question and make sure we get to everyone's questions. And we are also recording this webinar, so we will send out the recording and the transcript to everyone afterwards. So those are just a few items to cover in the beginning, and I will pass it now off to our presenters, Gretchen and Brian.
Thanks, Kathy. I just wanted to welcome everybody. This is part of a panel that Gretchen Sneeden and I have been doing since for the last, I don't know, has it been a couple months? Yeah. To really look at the role of, particularly the role of leisure in parenting and how leisure can be intentionally used to provide a better connection and improve family cohesion and adaptability through the use of intentional leisure activities that are both easily accessed and everyday types of things, as well as those that exist and happen less frequently and typically take a little more resource planning.
Yeah,
Gretchen,
I'm just going to say hello. For those of you who have been here for our previous sessions, welcome, and it's good to see everyone. We do have some smaller numbers today, so we would love to hear your input. We're going to have some opportunity to, typically we say add to the chat box, but we can allow people to talk if you would like to. So if you would like to contribute to the conversation or have your question heard aloud, please use the raise hand feature down at the bottom, and we can give you microphone capabilities. And yeah, so it's a small group, but hopefully that means that you can, get your questions answered and really engage with us as we go through this.
So a lot of material that we've been drawing from this document that's available at the TU Collaborative. And so if you're new to the webinar series and you haven't seen this, we do have this as one of a number of resources to support parents and families who experience mental health conditions. Kathy's put the link for this particular document in the chat. So if you're interested in downloading it, this has a number of good ideas and resources supporting parents who have a mental illness. And this is really one of the reasons that we have taken this approach, is that while many of the family approaches for serving mental health needs focus on families that might have a child with a mental health condition, there's not as much in the way of resources for parents who have a mental health condition. And so one of the reasons that we've even been working on this webinar is really to try and focus that support at the parent level, not just at the child level.
And Brian, I love this document, and I would encourage folks to either use it for themselves or to share it with people that you might support. It's very hands-on. There's a lot of guided activities throughout that really, encourage goal setting. There's prompts for parents to interact and engage with their kids. So it's really a user-friendly document. And of course, we encourage providers to incorporate it into sessions that they may be using to support people. And I will also throw out the reminder that we at the Collaborative are available for training and support and consultation. And so if you have questions about how you might be able to use this in services, please don't hesitate to reach out, because it is, and I say this with all sincerity, it is one of our favorite things to do to support providers in better supporting encouraging the people that they work with to really embrace community participation, and in this case, leisure participation, as it supports their role as parents. Today's objectives, if you've been following along, we've been talking about the importance of leisure and parenting, and the roles that it can play with developing bonds with kids. We've discussed strategies for increasing participation in what is called core-based leisure, which are those things that occur frequently and in the home, and also balanced leisure, which are those activities that occur typically outside of the home and require more resources, often definitely time and possibly planning commitment, but scheduling and navigating the community. But today we're really focusing on how leisure and recreation activities with children can be an opportunity to talk about mental health, and to talk about a parent's diagnosis, to really open up the communication, because sometimes, mental illness, if hidden, can really put stress on the relationship, the family relationship. And if things happen where maybe there's an inpatient stay, if there's not an understanding of what's going on beforehand, then, that could be really scary and disruptive for the family itself. So today we're really going to dive in this as sort of a standalone topic. And I hope that it's a practical resource that either you may use as a parent, or you might use to support parents that you're working with. And with that, we're going to start. This is a poll just to kind of get conversations going, and we'd love to hear what you think. Do you think it's beneficial for parents to talk about their mental health diagnoses with their children? And a poll should have popped up in front of you. And Hannah, I'm hoping it got filled. Okay.
There we go.
Great. Oh, you have the option for polls. I see it now. It went away. So I guess before we really go into the strategies for talking about mental health or mental illnesses or diagnoses with kids, we're going to talk a little bit, or Brian's going to talk about why a parent might be hesitant to talk about their mental health diagnosis with their children.
Right. And the poll definitely showed that, people felt that talking about their mental illness with their child is something that would be useful, even if in some ways qualified. But part of the challenge that we see that parents with mental health condition have is related to the issue of stigma. And I realize that the graphic here is a little difficult to see, but let me explain what you're looking at. So a colleague of mine, when I was at Indiana University, led a study of stigma related to mental health across 16 countries, North America, Europe, South America, Africa, Eastern Europe. And what they found was they used a number of different items, 27 different items, and that's what's in the rows. And then what's in the columns are the different countries. And the way they showed this graphically was by identifying the size of the dot represents the proportion of the population that endorsed that particular item. And so what they found was that, like, for example, if we're looking at across countries, the first column, IS, I'm pretty sure is Israel. And what you'll see is that most of the dots there in Israel are relatively small. And there are only a few in which endorsement was like very large. So the largest dot represents 75% of the people endorsed that idea. On the far right-hand side, you'll see at the top of the column is CY, which is Cyprus, and you'll see that stigma was extremely high in that particular culture. But across 16 different countries, they were really trying to look at what are the commonly held stigmatizing attitudes towards people with mental health conditions. And so what they found was that they looked at these items, and if you look across the bottom of this table, you'll see that almost all of those items show high endorsement by people in those countries. So regardless of how little stigma they had on other items, these items were what they called the backbone of stigma. And if we can go to the next slide, what you'll see is that across 16 countries, the top 5 stigmatizing attitudes involve shouldn't teach children. People were unwilling to have those as an in-law. They were thought to be unpredictable, likely to be violent to self, and unwilling to care for children. And so what we see is across cultures, and the United States is one of these cultures. Across cultures, we see that attitudes around people with mental health conditions and their connection and association with children and or parenting is something that is considered is fraught with stigmatization, and people are thought to be unfit to be able to be parents. And so this becomes one of the real, I think, challenges around talking about mental health conditions as a parent and being able to connect with children.
And I think, you know, this slide, so we recognize that there are stigmatizing attitudes from the general public, and what we also know about stigma is it can be internalized. But I think it's important just to put out the idea, this question: does talking about mental illness make a difference? And this table's a little bit blurry, and I apologize for that. But on the left-hand side, you can see that these are what happens, or what the research tells us, if a parent hides their mental illness or isn't transparent with their diagnosis with their child. And you sort of see that the theme throughout there is that it doesn't tend to be positive. The children may feel more stressed when parents show symptoms. They may not understand what's going on. They may feel the need to sort of act as a caretaker. They may feel that the way that their parent is acting or the symptoms that they're experiencing are somehow their fault. They often may not understand it, and you would be surprised. Kids hear and perceive more things, and despite how much we try to protect them, they understand more about what's going on than we expect. I find myself needing to change the radio station. I have a 3-year-old now, and I typically listen to NPR or the news, and everybody's been around. The news hasn't been very great the past few months, honestly, with things in Russia, with shootings, with all the things that are happening. And he'll pick up on things. And there was locally, there was a building that had a gas explosion. He was like, a house exploded? That can happen? So kids hear these things no matter how much we try to protect them. So if they hear it and there's no context, they're going to try to make sense of it. And they may think that this is an illness or a diagnosis, so it might be something they can catch, or they may find it scary. And parents, in their desire to protect children from their diagnosis or from knowing about it, may not seek the treatment that they need because of the consequences or stress that it may place on their family. So these are some things that, and they may experience then more stress when trying to hide their symptoms and hide their diagnosis from their family members. And so, which may then, of course, we know, lead to exacerbation of symptoms, or possibly more frequent or a higher need for inpatient care. And so what we get just from the research is that it's not good for kids, and it's really not good for the parent either, when even if it's coming from the best of intentions, to hide that mental illness diagnosis from family members or from kids. And what we find on the flip side is that talking about mental illness with children allows children to feel less stressed about it. They're less likely to feel responsible for their parents' diagnosis or symptoms or symptomatic related behavior. They have a sense of, they understand it better, and they can understand that it's not past like the common cold, and so that it seems less scary. Parents can also when there's an open line of communication between parents and other family members, they can better prepare for hospitalization if needed. They can make some of those preparations when they're feeling well, so that they know that something is in place if the chance comes up that they might need to be hospitalized. And they then feel more comfortable with their diagnosis and symptoms and can address some of those issues earlier, which may actually reduce the stress within the family and also reduce the need for hospitalization.
Gretchen, I think one of the things to think about too in this is this idea that this approach helps to normalize the experience, right? That it isn't something that's exceptional, that has to be hidden, that it can't be talked about. I mean, I think that's one of the keys here that is the value in this, talking about it openly, is that it really helps to make it so that it's something that a child could ask a parent about. They wouldn't be afraid to ask them about it. And parents could own it. They would be in a position where they could, say that this is what I experience and these are the challenges I have.
And I think that, a lot of what we have focused on is sort of a younger group of kids, but I think this becomes important when, the onset of mental illnesses tends to be late adolescence, early adulthood. And if those lines of communication are open, and kids moving into adulthood have a better understanding. And while, mental illness isn't contagious, there is some genetic predisposition. So there may be some characteristics that older kids start to experience or symptoms they start to exhibit. If they have an understanding, it may feel less chaotic and anxiety producing if those symptoms become apparent or realized, and they may feel more comfortable going to a parent and saying, hey, this is going on, how do I address that? So it really could support the children, or when they become older, to have some of those open lines of communication and better support their own mental health when they get older.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've got with a small group. I'm really wondering if folks are thinking about what are some concerns that might come up with actually sharing one's diagnosis or mental health condition with one's children or one's child. Are there any reasons that, at least one person felt that maybe it was worthwhile to talk about it, but what concerns might come up as a result of talking about this? So please feel free to raise a hand or just pop it in the chat.
Brian, sometimes I think one of the concerns is we always want to, it's hard to let kids see things that parents can't control, and I think that even sickness like colds and flu, like that's hard to let, you have your role as a parent and you're supposed to be able to be this sort of steadfast person without unflappable, and any sort of I don't want to say weakness, but anything that sort of disrupts the daily flow and structure of life it's hard to let kids see that, because you want them to see you as sort of this always there person.
One of the other things, and I think we'll talk about a little bit later, is timing is also one of the things that we want to think about. Like, when is the best time to actually have that conversation, to talk about it, and when in crisis may not be the best time, particularly if there hasn't been a conversation that's happened before.
Yeah, no, definitely. If it's easy to put off things that are not here. But when they're here and it's a crisis situation, it definitely is a much more challenging conversation to have. Yeah, thanks, Hannah. If you're uncomfortable sending things directly through chat, you are able to send it directly to the panelists, and we will present the information without disclosing who you are. But I think, feel free to add to the conversation, but Hannah, if you want to jump to the next slide. So here's just some really practical ways to have these conversations with kids as they're sort of targeted towards their age range. And for younger kids, I think it's really helpful to focus on the behavior that might be different, because that's going to be something that kids notice and can see, and that can really start the conversation. When kids are a little bit older, those conversations can be a little bit deeper, can reference different time periods. You can ask more comparison type questions, or use more comparative prompts that would encourage the children to engage in the conversation differently. So these are some resources, and again, these come from that manual that we referenced at the beginning of the presentation.
So one of the things that that we do focus on is not just the risk factors for things, but what are some of the what are the factors that protect people from stress, and how do we build and increase resilience? And so a number of these elements have been identified as providing some support and protection that helps the family to remain resilient even in times of stress. One of the things that Gretchen, I think, had mentioned earlier is this idea that, again, through conversations about it, a parent can normalize their health conditions, any health condition, so that it becomes something that's recognized by the child as a part of the parent, and not something that is stigmatizing or even different, and that it becomes a part of how they see their parent. My father has a disability, and it wasn't something that I ever noticed because it was just part of him. I didn't notice him being any different than anybody else. But it also sets the tone in terms of, again, when parents are willing to seek treatment, it continues to normalize this. I mean, we don't avoid treatment for other physical health conditions, but people do avoid treatment for mental health conditions sometimes, again, because of the stigma around it. And so when parents are willing to seek out treatment and support, it helps to normalize that experience and create increases the resilience in the family. Ways to keep and maintain some degree of stability. We do talk about some of the values of core and balanced leisure as ways to structure the family life so that there is some degree of routine or regularity in interactions and in the family structure. This sometimes is easier when children are younger and are able to be a part of a school environment that potentially structures family. Other things that we see are the development of self-esteem, feelings of competence, and strength and coping skills within children. So again, these are through this conversation, through the ability to talk and normalize the experience, we can identify a number of factors increasing the resilience of both the parent, the child, and the family overall.
And Hannah, there you go. I was just going to say the next slide really talks about we've taken some of those protective factors from the last slide, and this probably isn't a fully comprehensive list, but these six factors, I think really have the opportunity to leisure and recreation really have an opportunity to address these areas. And I think we're going to, in the next few slides, really go into some specific activities. And actually the next slide itself has an opportunity for folks to add to the chat about how leisure activities might be used to enhance some of these areas. And again, if you've come to our last few sessions, then I think you guys might be ahead of the game and can add some ideas. But I think these are really some of those areas where leisure and recreation activities that are done as a family can be used to enhance these areas of resilience. And please feel free to add things to the chat as ideas come up. Otherwise, Brian and I will just chit chat about some things that might be relevant to this.
Well, let me begin with the first one then. Anyways, and it's interesting because this is a balance activity that I remember from when I was a child. We'd go see. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and there was very little in the way of baseball, but occasionally, I remember really only on 3 occasions that my father and I and my brother and usually somebody he worked with would drive to Pittsburgh to see the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it was a connection that really, it was very strong. And so while my daughters were growing up, we would go, and I tend to prefer minor league baseball to majors. It's easier, it's more accessible. And so my daughters would go with me, and we still really enjoy going to see baseball games. And so that's something that really does provide a very interesting connection among both my connection with my parents, but also my connection with my daughters. Whereas my wife's family, they're not baseball fans at all. so they don't find it as better a good way of connecting. So, these kinds of things really do help us to really connect with each other and find shared interests.
And one of the core leisure examples that I can give both for my kids and for when I was growing up was reading books together. I remember, even up through middle school when I would stay with my grandparents, my grandma and I would, obviously they were much longer books than what I read with my very young children now, but I remember before bed we would read, I think it was the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairie books, but we would go, I'd read a couple pages, she would read a couple pages, and we did that long beyond what is typically the read books to your kids phase. And it was a great connection that I had with my grandma. It wasn't something that I did with anybody else in my family. And so I think that was really something that allowed us to bond over an activity. And same thing, I'm the one that predominantly reads to my kids, and they pick up books and they sort of back up and plop down on my lap and we read books. And it's definitely something that is a mom and kid activity for us.
So Gretchen, one of the ones I'm gonna jump in on is the idea of strength and coping, and that's actually one of the really interesting ones too, because particularly with a lot of the types of games, whether it's small games or I also have 2 grandsons, and we started playing Uno last summer, and trust me, it required some coping skills because just when you think you're going to win, you get a draw 4. And figuring out how to deal with that, how to deal with things that are dissatisfactory, things that don't turn out the way you want them to turn out, are one of the ways that we can develop those coping skills in ways that failure in a game of Uno really doesn't mean anything. And so helping children to deal with dissatisfaction and negative outcomes is an important aspect of that.
And kind of related to that, and it sort of addresses multiple areas, but both when I was younger and then my kids now as well, we all love biking, and it definitely gives us a option for physical health, but it gives us something to do outside of the house. And sometimes you fall off your bike. And I have found that my 3-year-old, when he falls off his bike, whereas other times when things don't go his way, he has a total meltdown. But when he falls off his bike, he's very resilient. He pops up, he's like, I'm okay. And he hops back on and he keeps going. And so it's this activity that he really enjoys. And I think he also likes to crash his bike. But sometimes he doesn't do it intentionally. And he's, I think, developing some skills around, coping and that inner strength where you can just sort of get back on the bike, so to speak. And I think it's a great activity for him to learn some of those skills through that.
So I don't know if anyone else in the, if anyone in the webinar can identify with any activities that they've done that may have helped them to connect with their family, and or develop any of these strengths.
Hey, Barbara.
Hey, well, it's not the reason why I'm here. I work for Mental Health America, and I'm looking for resources for parents and families.
Great.
But while you were talking, I realized my children, they're grown, and their dad has a diagnosis of, I'm trying to remember what it was, because I don't think of him in terms of a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
What is it when somebody is just, they think just about themselves? But anyway, I guess that's not relevant. But anyway, they had not been able to spend time with him. And I had full custody when they were little,
Mm-hmm.
but they wanted to.
Right.
And so now as adults, the only way they can spend time with him where they feel safe and everyone has a good time and respectful of their dad and what he can bring to the table. He loves them immensely.
Mm-hmm.
That's never been in question, just that he has limitations.
Right.
So is to have planned leisure activities. That's all they do together.
Mm-hmm.
Go kayaking, and it's all planned. And the more it's
Mm-hmm.
planned, the more successful it is. So while you're talking, that's all I could think about.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't something that the therapist, because there's been a lot of them over the years, actually promoted. It's
Right.
just something I think every kid wants to connect with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
They want to have some relationship and be loved and validated by their parents. And so for us, this is how it worked out.
Sure.
Where it's not putting an unrealistic expectation on their dad,
Mm-hmm.
where he is expected to be,
Right.
to excel to some goal that he can't attain
Mm-hmm.
consistently. But everybody can have a good time when it's a planned event. Everybody
Right.
knows what's happening, and now they have wonderful memories. They
Sure.
share pictures, whitewater rafting, that type of stuff. I wish somebody had shared with their therapists and the family counselors years ago.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to stumble it on our own. So kudos, that's what I wanted to say. I'm hearing you say there's not that many people there. I don't know how many people are attending, but for those that are there, this is important because it allows people to be loved for who they are.
Right.
And Barbara, you make an excellent point in thinking about how, like, if relationships have been strained, or there's been a long separation, it's hard to you don't just jump back into a regular parenting role. It's really challenging. And so you're
Especially
correct.
when your kids are in their 20s.
Yeah. You know, leisure and recreation is really an opportunity to engage in those, to have really normalizing experiences. There are a lot, and having the planned activities gives a good point that there's a lot less stress when you go in, and things, you're going into things that are fun. So it does provide an opportunity to build that relationship during an activity. And then, you know, depending on the relationship, the needs of the family, needs of the kids, then maybe other roles from that parent-child relationship evolve.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I was going to add too, Gretchen. I mean, that's one of the things about particularly leisure and recreation activities, is that it also provides somewhat of a safe space to start to talk. And you can talk about what you're doing. You don't have to talk about what you're feeling or what the past is. You can actually just begin by talking about this thing we're doing together. And it provides a safe space for a conversation to begin. So,
and I would add also, I mean, particularly in this case, and I remembered what the diagnosis is. I'm not going to share it because it's not relevant. But it took me a while because I think of him as a person. I don't think of him as a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But we all know so much about it.
Yeah.
And we knew the consequences of it and everything else. So, you know, so there wasn't the balance of healthy memories against this body of knowledge about the diagnosis. So yeah, so I think you know, so I'm happy for them. And
yeah.
And my kids are better for knowing their dad in different ways.
Oh, that's great.
So I don't know if that would encourage others to explore.
Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. You can mute me now.
And I think, Hannah, we'll jump to the next slide. So the next thing that we're going to really talk about are ways that leisure and recreation can be used to talk about a mental health diagnosis with children. So again, you know, leisure is recognized as a safe place. It's lighthearted. There's a fun activity. It also, as Brian mentioned, gives you an activity to focus on where you can bring up and explore maybe more complicated or more challenging conversations. And Hannah, jump to the next slide because we'll just jump right into the activities. So some of the young kids, playing with dolls or action figures can give a great way to use those characters to have the conversations and talk about the doll or the action figure can actually play the role of mom or dad and can talk about the experience. I remember when I was working with kids it was in a mental health treatment setting, but I was able to use this type of activity to talk through how a kid could have responded in a certain situation. But you can, use puppets. My son he's obsessed with these elephants. There's a baby elephant, mommy elephant, daddy elephant. Everybody has their own elephant. But that provides an opportunity where if mommy elephant is feeling sad, I can use that to explain it through that character. And it might feel a little initially less scary or threatening. I use threatening sort of lightly, but a way to have those conversations, and baby elephant or my son could ask mommy elephant questions and kind of do that role playing without initially feeling as directly interactive or lightly confrontational.
Yeah. One of the other approaches is to use obviously some types of media. So storybooks are a good example of ways to talk about feelings and talk about emotions and experience emotions. It also reminds me of the Disney film Inside Out. I don't know if you ever saw Inside Out, but that is another one about feelings and about really being able to deal with all feelings, not just happy ones, but a range of feelings. And so these are offer opportunities. So a couple of resources, this In My Heart, which is a book about feelings, which really is appropriate. Another one, Mr. Happy and Miss Grimm. Again, these are both opportunities to explore sort of how people feel, to be able to have a child ask questions about how a parent feels, the parent be able to ask the child about how they feel. And so there are a number of resources like this.
And I will mention, we're mentioning these books mainly because they're about feelings and emotions. We don't have any connections to the authors.
Right.
Found them and thought that they were good books to sort of broach the conversation about emotions. Yeah. There are likely books that deal directly with a parent or a character having a diagnosis. I know there's similar books about substance use. Sesame Street has a number of resources related to substance use and possibly mental health as well. And so if media is a way to engage, then there are definitely resources that are out there.
Yep.
Sand play is also very similar to that sort of doll and action figure, but it might be something that is appropriate for a slightly older group because it allows for a little bit more creativity. You can, again, you don't need a large sandbox to do this. You can do it in sort of a tub, but it can be set up where characters build different areas. But the same type of thing is you can have the conversation through the characters without feeling as directly personal in the initial introduction.
And Gretchen, one of the things I would throw out too is that there are a number of other types of play like this that are interactive. I mean, my older grandson, it loves Legos and is constantly creating things with Legos and building with Legos and doing scenes. And so it's an opportunity way to work with him because it's a very good time to connect with him and have conversations. And I've actually used it that way to talk about some of the problems he was having at school because through Legos, it was a little easier for him to talk when we were doing Legos.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're throwing some suggestions out there, but parents, know their kids.
Right.
So follow their lead in the types of activities that they enjoy. And if there are interactive and sort of self-directive, creative type activities, you can use those to bring in some of these conversations. The next thing we're going to talk about is how you might talk with your kids after you've sort of broached this conversation around having a mental health diagnosis. How might you then use leisure or recreation or even other strategies to prepare kids for a parent's possible inpatient stay? This isn't something where if it's happening in 10 minutes, it's probably not the best time to have the conversation. But it might be something that if it's going to happen in the future, or even just saying that this may happen, and these are some conversations that you might use. So here's some questions and some things to think about. Really, it's emphasizing what happens, who's going to take care of me as a kid, or how is my daily life going to continue to happen, making sure that kids know it's not their fault and that they are loved, and emphasizing that this is an opportunity to support mom or dad to feel better so they can get back to spending time as a family together. And again, some of the strategies that might be able to be used are some of those things that we talked about. So whether it's sand play or character play or through Legos or whatever that interactive activity might be.
One of the things too that we can encourage parents to do is also to provide some sort of, whether it's a letter or a video, to help the child to understand what the parent is going through, and really to reassure the child that the parent seeking treatment is not something that is bad, that something actually is quite good, and that that the parent plans to be back and really wants to re-engage with the child, play with them in terms of activities. You could also, the parent can also even not only do some of the things while they're gone to encourage the child, but could potentially even engage in some online activities or collaborative types of activities even when they're away. This is something that we've definitely learned as a result of the pandemic, is how to remain connected even when physically separated.
And I think, a letter or a video is important because it allows you to deliver a message directly to your kids in your own words. And so as much as we trust the people that are our chosen, care providers for our kids when we're away, they may be feeling stressed with having a partner or a loved one go into an inpatient setting, and having this type of thing, writing this letter or recording this video beforehand gives you as a parent the opportunity to have that communication with your child and deliver that message and really reassure them while you're away, which can be very comforting as a parent if you're then if you're away from your child and you haven't been able to, talk to them right before leaving or whatever it might be. This is a way to really deliver that message in your own words. The other thing that I think is important is creating it's something that could be done for whoever is the caregiver to sort of reduce the stress around planning some of those family leisure activities, but it helps make sure that some of those things that might be incorporated into your daily routine or those core activities that are really critical for your own family, it can make sure that some of those things continue to happen even in your absence, and that your children know that you had a hand in making sure that those things continue.
And so this is an opportunity just to identify any other ways that that you might think that a parent could support their child to engage in leisure and recreation activities that are pleasurable and help them to remain connected with sometimes with the other family members, sometimes with parent.
I think if there are routines or rituals that are relevant to the children, there might be an opportunity, if bedtime routines or there's a favorite book, make sure that Aunt Sally or whomever it is has that book and they can read it to you at night. Or, think about if there are ways to, I have some of my favorite books or my kids' favorite books memorized where if they turn the pages, I can recite those books to them. So if there's an opportunity for video calls, there's some of those ways, some of the ways that those things can happen to help continue that routine. Or if kids like drawing, you can prompt your child to, hey, could you make me something, or I'd to hear about your day. I'd love for you to draw me a picture from today. So give them some tasks and activities that connect to the leisure recreation activities that they enjoy, that they can have responsibility of, and then it provides an opportunity to share a connection, a meaningful connection about a day-to-day life, so that the focus is not just on the fact that the parent is in an inpatient setting at the moment.
Right. Yep.
Oh, there's chat. I see that maybe I'm not. Kathy is adding some resources that you're welcome to check out. There's the Family Leisure Toolkit that we also had one during pandemic time that referenced some activities that parents and families could do together that were COVID friendly, which those of course are still relevant but also, you know, there may be some resources in there that actually are easier to use if people are in two separate locations, because it does talk about some of the digital resources that might be available.
Right. One of the things that is available in the parenting leisure resource is just a brief script. The idea being that sometimes it may be more beneficial for a parent to think through what they're going to say before contacting and communicating with their child when they're in treatment. And it may just provide a way for someone to be able to talk in a way that will be clear, will not be something that the child would be concerned about, and also to be open and honest about their experience. That as a parent, that they probably are missing their child and the types of things they want to do next time they see them. These are all just some suggestions, and this little prompt here is just a way to get people thinking about how to structure that conversation.
But these could be things, you know, if you're a provider, you might think through sort of tailoring this to an individual that you're working with, and helping them think through what that conversation might look like, so that it's and then if you know your client or the person you support is going into an inpatient setting and you've developed this resource with them, it's something you could print off and bring to them, or let them you know, provide them that access to that resource, so they can have that conversation and use those tools that they've developed. And this is just if there are more parenting resources or family leisure related resources that you are interested in, these can be found at our website, which is www.tucollaborative.org. If you click on the resources tab at the top, there's a parents section that has a number of resources where these can be found. And in the next week, we will also be sending out a thank you for participating with a link to the recorded webinar, and a list of resources that you can access. Please, oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just going to say, we did want to be sure to thank everyone for participating. We appreciate folks tuning in and following along in whatever of the webinar parts that you followed along on. We're happy to talk about this in greater detail and provide any kind of support if you work for an agency that would like to have more information, or even do a specific webinar on family, the role of family leisure in family functioning. We'd be happy to do that too. That is one of the things that we do. We also wanted to make sure that we are currently recruiting for a supported family leisure family connection research study. We are recruiting for adults who are parents between the ages of 18 and 65, but have a child between the ages of 7 and 15, that they have at least access or partial custody or legal visitation. And so if you happen to know of anyone or work with anyone who might have an interest, we'd really appreciate it if you could pass along this information. And
I think this is really a great opportunity. I know as Barbara mentioned, you know, this wasn't the idea of family leisure, and the importance of connecting parents and kids through leisure may not be something that typically comes up when providers are supporting adults as an adult with a mental illness, because sometimes that role of parenting is not always centrally focused on. And this would really be an opportunity where parents are able to talk about their needs and really explore strategies to develop their own family leisure participation plans, both for those things that occur at home and those other types of activities that could occur in the community. So we're hopeful that this is an interesting resource that you might be able to share with individuals who might be interested.
Mhm.
And please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us at either tucollaborative.org or .edu. tucollab at temple.edu. That is our email address. Or I think our emails are on the next slide. Hannah, is that correct? Or if not, I can drop mine in chat.
Yeah.
We don't have it on the next slide now.
Okay. This is mine in the chat box. So if you do have a question, or if you would like to, again, as Brian mentioned, facilitate a training with your own staff around parenting and leisure or family leisure, let us know. We're happy to connect.